honestly, the biggest thing that I can say positively about the book is that I'm really glad it exists for people who are in fundamentalism, who need to hear the messages presented in this book, but would not be willing to listen to someone who is outside of religious fundamentalism or Christianity, or even to someone who is a progressive Christian. I think sometimes it's easy to forget that on our respective journeys out of religious fundamentalism, there are stepping stones. I think of my journey out of fundamentalism. There were people that I read who I would not endorse now, who were radical for my perspective as someone who was in a very big religious fundamentalist bubble. There were people who I would not normally, pick up a copy of their book, but I started to read them. And because they were still in my Christian orbit, I felt a little bit safer to do so. There are many fundamentalist women who have been taught to fulfill checklists, to get approval from others, who have, to get approval from God, who are going to pick up a copy of Jinger Duggar's book. And some of the things she says in this are going to be absolutely radical to them. I'm glad the book exists for that purpose. Again, that doesn't mean I recommend the book. It doesn't mean that I am the biggest fan of the book, but I think it is important to remember, like, for some people, this is a message as elementary as some of the things in the book might be. It's going to be helpful to some of these people. The other thing I liked about the book is just that there's a lot of just openness about the experience of growing up. I think I mentioned this in both Jinger and Jill's previous books, that I really appreciate hearing more of their perspective of growing up on camera. And I think the amount of pressure that added to them as kids. And one of the things I really love listening to Jinger talk now is, like, she doesn't exploit her kids on camera. They're very careful to cover their faces. Like, I like that they reflect on some of those struggles. And she also opens up about some of her tendencies to want to be a people pleaser or a serial server, as she says in the book. And then the third most important thing that I loved about the book, and it's something I wish she would have touched on honestly more, is she talks about the importance of community. Now, look, I know that's an evangelical buzzword, and like, we need to hang out and we need to fellowship with each other and we need to have community. But she talks a little bit about the science of how community helps us. And again, I wish she would have dove a lot deeper into this because I think it's so important. But one of the things she talks about in the book is these people who are super agers. Now, if you don't know what a super ager is, Harvard says that super agers are known to maintain peak mental prowess well into their 90s and avoid Alzheimer's disease and other dementia. While the general thinking is that memory declines and brain function slow as we age no matter what, studies on super agers suggest this is not inevitable, and there may be ways to maintain high levels of cognitive function for much longer in life. One of the key components to being a super ager is to tend to have more social interaction. Studies have shown that regular social engagement is associated with healthier brains. The opposite is also true. Social isolation is linked to lower volume of gray matter in brain regions related to cognition. And I think this is something that's really important, especially for people who've left fundamentalism and tend to, as a first step, isolate themselves. It can be extremely dangerous. In fact, I was actually just recently having a conversation with my friend Travis, who has a podcast aptly named Travis Makes Friends. And he shared with me that in 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General declared a public health epidemic. He said widespread loneliness in the U.S. poses health risks as deadly as smoking up to 15 cigarettes daily, costing the health industry billions of dollars annually. Loneliness is a major health crisis right now, and I'm glad that it's something she talked about in the book. Again, I wish it would have been in slightly more depth, but just the fact she's talking about like super agers and some of the benefits of having strong relationships is so valuable.